Namaste. Very warm welcome to this broadcast today. Muji ji ki jai, Ananta ji ki jai, Sangha ki jai. Looks like no one has joined just as yet, so I'll be reading from a book until someone joins in. I'll be reading from Adi Shanti's Falling into Grace. I'll read from the 10th chapter. I'll read from the 10th chapter, which is called Beyond the World of Opposites. In recent times, there was a sage in India named Nisargadatta Maharaj. I read a discussion he had with a woman, and she was telling him about how she saw the world, about the suffering and striving, the violence and anger, and the greed, and her own inner world of turmoil. She asked him how he interacted in that world, and he said something very surprising. He said, "That's your world. I don't exist in your world. I don't even know your world. In my world, none of that exists." It took me aback when I read this. I thought, what does he mean? What does he mean that he doesn't exist in that world? That his world is something else? It brought to mind another saying that's very well known, where Jesus says, "I am in the world, but not of it." This is a very similar kind of saying. There's a deep truth that is being revealed through both of these teachings. What is this world that Nisargadatta said he's not in, and that Jesus was referring to when he said, "I'm in it, but not of it"? Of course, they're talking about our world, the one in which most human beings exist when we open our eyes, go about our lives, and have interactions. That's the world that Jesus was saying, "I'm in it, but not of it." The world most humans are in is the world of relativity, of light and dark, of good and bad, of love and hate. This is the world that most of us are born into, the world of opposites. In fact, the manifest world around us is nothing but the interaction of opposites, of nighttime turning into daytime, of daytime turning into nighttime, of love and hate, of breathing in and breathing out, of good and bad, of should and shouldn't. Everything in the manifest world operates through this flux and flow of opposites. In some ways, these distinctions are necessary. Life itself couldn't exist without opposites, without night and day, without breathing in and breathing out. If you look closer, you'll find that within most human beings, we find the same opposites: the good and the bad, the right and the wrong, what I should and what I shouldn't do, what I imagine should happen and what shouldn't happen. This world of opposites informs the functioning of our minds. It provides a framework in which our minds can operate. So, how can these sages say that this is not the world that's true to them, not the world where they essentially are? They may operate in this world, they may seem to exist in it, but really, where their consciousness is, where their real home is in another world. It's vitally important that we understand these two worlds. The conventional world is the world of our imagination, of duality, of right and wrong. This is the world in which we most often interact. When our minds operate in this relative world, our only choice is to relate to life in terms of opposites. So I'll read that again. He says, when our minds operate in this relative world, our only choice is to relate to life in terms of opposites. The egoic state of consciousness is defined by duality: good and bad, right and wrong, form and formlessness, spirit and matter. This is the state of consciousness that we are in when we are identified with ego. It is the state of consciousness where it's always either this or that. It's not this and that. Either I'm right or I'm wrong. Either you're right or you're wrong. There is a whole other state of consciousness, a state of consciousness that isn't of the world of duality. This is the state of consciousness that Jesus referred to as the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is really the state of consciousness that's beyond duality, that's not living within the confines of duality. As a person, Jesus clearly existed within the world of duality, but his consciousness was obviously somewhere else. His consciousness was in the kingdom of heaven, what the Buddha called nirvana. Nirvana refers to complete freedom from the wheel of suffering and the life lived outside the egoic state of consciousness altogether. The Buddha, being of the wheel of suffering, was no longer living from the perspective of right and wrong, good and bad, light and dark. When we begin to wake up from the egoic state of consciousness, we release the view of life that's confined to relative viewpoints. Interestingly, there is something about this to our minds that sounds dangerous. What could it mean to be beyond right and wrong, beyond good and bad? Wouldn't that just lead to chaos? What would be the principle upon which human beings lived? What would keep us from acting in unkind and hurtful ways? But of course, those kind of questions come from the limitations of egoic consciousness, which is an expression of relativity. Egoic consciousness cannot even imagine another state. All it can do is project its own understanding of another state, but it can never actually attain it. Spiritual awakening isn't for our egos, it's for our deeper inner nature. It's for the source and substance of what we really are. The next section is called To Abide in Non-Abiding. Many years ago, I was staying at a Buddhist monastery, and the abbess there, a wonderful wise woman, made a very interesting observation. She said, everybody knows not to get caught in hell, but very few people know how not to get caught in heaven. At the time I heard that, I really didn't understand it. First I thought, well, yeah, our instinct isn't to get caught in hell, but a lot of people do. Then I thought, why wouldn't somebody want to be caught in heaven? Why wouldn't somebody want to be caught in enlightenment? This seemed to be a very strange thing she was saying. Don't get caught in heaven. It took me many years before I realized myself what she meant by this. Because if we get caught in heaven, it's just as limiting as getting caught in hell. It would almost be like saying, breathe out a great sense of ah. It feels so good to breathe out. So the goal is to breathe out. But if all we did was breathe out, we die pretty soon. We have to breathe in so that we can breathe out. They go together like a right hand and a left hand, like up and down on a seesaw. When we are in egoic consciousness, we are always trying to move away from what we think is bad toward what we imagine to be good. But of course, what we imagine to be good is also intimately linked with the appearance of what's bad. No matter how far or how deep our spiritual realization goes, it's always important to know how not to get caught in heaven or hell. Actually, to never be caught anywhere. As, as one old wise Zen master said, to abide in non-abiding. Jesus referred to the state that's beyond the pair of opposites when he said, the foxes have their holes in the ground and the birds have their nests in the trees, but the Son of Man has nowhere to rest his head. The foxes have their holes in the ground and the birds have their nest in the trees, but the Son of Man has nowhere to rest his head. It was his way of reminding people that where he is, the kingdom of heaven, isn't really heavenly. It's beyond heaven and hell. It's beyond the pairs of opposites. We've turned Jesus' heaven into the opposite of hell. But clearly for Jesus, the kingdom of heaven wasn't something that's confined or even defined by the pairs of opposites. For him, the kingdom of heaven was something entirely different. It was a state of consciousness that wasn't caught within the dualistic point of view at all. So I've often wondered, at what point do we call ourselves the person? In Avaduta Gita, it said that Maya, the great illusion, is itself the delusion. What did Avaduta mean by this? The tendency to call ourselves persons, the moment we call ourselves persons, we become a person. Can suffering make us a person? Can belief make us a person? Can movement of thought make us a person? Can strong feelings make us a person? Can hell make us a person? At what point do we refer to ourselves as a person? Initially, when many of us come to satsang, the moment we have the experience of awakening, we experience a deep sense of peace and joy. So the moment this peace and joy seems to fade, we say that I've become a person again. I've become an ego again. Can we really become an ego? The only advocate for the ego is the ego itself. But even this does not make us the ego. What are we not okay with? When we say this shouldn't happen, we say that if this happens, I've become a person. But that itself is another thought. What can really make us a person? Even if we were to have the thought that this shouldn't be happening, has even that made us a person? If even this thought is getting belief, have we become a person even then? Are we okay with our not okays? When we say this shouldn't happen, are we okay with that? Even if we are not okay, are we okay with that even? I was reminded of the saying that Ram mentioned. He said, Anthony de Mello, a teacher, he said, enlightenment is the cooperation with the inevitable. The absolute surrender to what is. Ultimately, we can't even escape our minds because our mind is us too. Can we begin to see that our internal world of thoughts, our mind, our egoic structure of consciousness is also us? It is so intricate that we cannot completely ever transcend it. The only way we can ever transcend it is by accepting that to be us. Byron Katie said she loves her thoughts. What does she mean by this? When you can love your thoughts, what problems can you have? Can you ever suffer by loving your thoughts? She also says another thing. She says when you love your past, you also love your future. And past is everything but thoughts. It's just thoughts. Because the past is projected into the future, we can say if we love our past, we'll also love our future. Right in this instant, wherever we are we okay with this? Even if we are not okay, are we okay with that? How many other layers of resistances are there? Are we okay with all of it? Are we okay with struggle? Are we okay with striving? Are we okay with effort? Are we okay with being a spiritual failure? Are we okay being completely unworthy spiritually? So the kingdom of heaven that Jesus spoke about includes hell as well. The unity of God doesn't exclude the devil. Enlightenment is not the state of non belief. Enlightenment is just what is. We can clearly see that life itself, when it's allowing something, is not excluding it. That's the reason it's allowing it. That's the reason it's happening. True good includes both good and bad. It is only in these contrasts that we can experience life. It is these contrasts that consciousness enjoys experiencing. Without these contrasts, would we have any validity to our experiences? If there was only joy, would we value it? Ultimately, it seems like we need to let our spiritual teachings go as well. Nothing can remove us from what we are. Even when you're lost, you're not lost. Even when you're not home, you're home. I'd heard a Zen master, I think, say something on the lines of, "Wherever I walk, a garden blooms." What could he have meant by that? Wherever he walks through resistances, he walks through his mind, he walks through everything, and wherever he goes, a garden blooms. Can we be okay with our mind? Can we be okay with all the things it throws up? Can we be okay with our problems? Can we be in love with our problems? Can we see the blessing it brings? Can we enjoy the feeling of getting caught up? What would happen to our problems if we began to enjoy it? As Father says, no being has ever been able to completely transcend the mind. Even great sages get caught up in the mind momentarily. The mind, at one level, is meant to be transcended, and at another level, meant to be embraced. It is like a little child who's intending to do good but doesn't know how. Can we see thoughts as ourselves? So I read another quote from Adi Shanti that I just came across today morning that I just wanted to read a bit now. Very similar to the lines of what we've been talking about just now. He says, what does it mean to be undivided? He says, in these teachings, I've talked about being undivided, and I've equated awakening with being in an undivided state. But I want to make sure that no one gets a mistaken idea of what it means to be undivided. Non-division is the effect of awakening. It is the expression of the realization of our true nature. As I've said, being undivided has nothing to do with being perfect or saintly. Also, there is no guarantee after awakening that in any particular moment you will not experience division in some way. There is no guarantee that division will never happen again. In fact, to be free, to be awakened, is to let go of concern with such things, with how awakened one is or isn't. One of the great poems of the Zen tradition ends with this description of the awakened state: to be without anxiety about imperfection. To be without anxiety about imperfection. So to be undivided does not mean to be perfect. Being undivided does not conform to the images we might have in our minds about holiness or perfection. If someone were to look at my life, I'm sure they could come up with lots of reasons to say something like, oh, that doesn't fit my idea of what an enlightened being would be. That doesn't fit my image of what an undivided being is like. I'm sure that my life would probably not conform to a lot of people's ideals about what they think enlightenment should look like. Because in truth, I'm much more of an ordinary person than most people would imagine. To me, a part of awakening is dying into ordinariness, into non-anxiety. Regardless of what someone might say, looking at my life or anyone else's life, the state of non-division is not something you can understand until it starts to wake up within you. I can only encourage you not to believe any image that may arise in your mind of holiness or perfection, because these images only get in the way. Being undivided, seeing and acting from non-separation from oneness, is something that we must each discover for ourselves. What is it to see beyond love and hate, beyond good and evil, beyond right and wrong? These things must be discovered in your own experience. Evaluating other people's experience of non-division is not helpful. The only thing that matters is where you are. In the moment you are experiencing and acting from division, or are you experiencing and acting from oneness? Which is it? So this is from the book End of Your World. So it is clear that the unity that he speaks about doesn't exclude division. It is a unity beyond unity and division. The mind can only think in terms of opposites, and it can only suggest in opposites. I came across this phrase in Hindi which says, "To fir problem kya hai?" What it actually means is that, so what's the problem? So every time we seem to have a problem, we can ask ourselves, what's the problem now? I've gotten caught up in the mind. So what's the problem now? It means I'm not there yet. So what's the problem now? It means I'm not worthy. So what's the problem now? What's the problem with being unworthy? What's the problem with being completely insignificant? What's the problem in getting caught up in doership? What's the problem in getting caught up in effort? What's the problem in experiencing some tension? What's the problem with having a problem? Can we consider that there is a state of unity which includes all of these things, which includes all our imperfections? As the great Zen master says, wherever I walk, a garden blooms. we can never leave home. Even if we left home, we haven't left home. The entire manifestation, all of it, including your mind, including everything, is our own playground. It's here so that we can explore it, not to be scared of it, not to retract into some conceptual hiding, not to avoid the world by using the knowledge that I'm awareness. I am awareness, but awareness also includes this. Thought is also awareness. Suffering is also awareness. Belief is also awareness. Division is also unity. Struggle is also unity. What are we not okay with? Can we be okay with our not being okay? So I'll continue reading a bit more from Falling into Grace. The dualistic point of view is very tricky and very subtle. Many of the classical spiritual teachings point us away from the mind and the body, away from the identification with all form. The ancient teachings would say, you're not this, you're not that, you're not the body, you're not the mind, you're not what you think. This has been referred to as the negative way, the way of negation. The negative way shows up in different forms of Hinduism, Buddhism, and also in Christianity. There's a way that these teachings point us away from attachment with all form, both gross and subtle, so that we can realize and wake up to our source as spirit, as presence, as that open field of awareness, which is not a thing at all. It's more like a great, awake, alive, nothing. But if we were to just try to hold on to that, then we would be just deluding ourselves once again. It may be a higher level of delusion than being caught in the egoic state of consciousness. But it's a state of delusion nonetheless, because it's not complete. It's just the opposite of the egoic state. The formless state of consciousness is just the opposite of that state of consciousness which is identified with form. In one of the Buddhist sutras called the Diamond Sutras, it is said, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. The teachings initially given to us, which remind us of our awake presence, of our awareness of that which we are, is to be open to the possibility that that which we are is completely unconditioned. Once we know this in our heart, once we know that that which I am is completely untouched, are we still holding on to diving back into the world? Diving back into the world of form, diving back into the world of thoughts. Are we completely okay playing it like a game if we truly know that it's a game? Once we know we are playing a game, wouldn't we be okay to lose? Does it matter then if we win or lose? Ultimately, the idea isn't to go from identification with form to identification with formlessness. It's not about going from a somebody to a nobody. You can't define the truth as something or as nothing. You can't ultimately define it as spirit or as matter. You can't define it as ego or as other than ego. Our ultimate nature can't be described in dualistic terms at all. To our minds, it will always remain a mystery because the process of thought that we use to apprehend things can only think in dualistic terms. So minds can never really know reality directly. Even on the level of our feelings, we feel good or we feel bad. We feel open or we feel closed. We feel happy or we feel sad. Even our emotions, at least the majority of them, are expressions of duality. In many forms of spirituality, you get the impression that there's almost a condemnation of life, and the realm of formlessness is really what it's all about. But if we get attached to the formless, the inner spaciousness of being, to that pure consciousness, even though it's much more free, open, and spacious, if we get caught there, we've just settled for another higher level of delusion. So, what is this truth that Jesus was speaking about? To be in to be in this world, but not of it. What is the truth that he was expressing in the story of the foxes having their holes in the ground and the birds in the trees, but the Son of Man having nowhere to rest his head? The teaching here is concerned with relativity, high and low, something and nothing, spirit and matter. What Jesus is saying here is that he is beyond this, and not just beyond it, but also including it. The Buddha was asked one day as he was walking down the road, "What are you? Are you a man?" The Buddha said, "No, I'm not a man." The Buddha was then asked, "Are you an animal?" The Buddha said, "No, I'm not an animal." "Well, then, are you a god?" "No, I'm not a god." The person asked in great frustration, "Well, what is it that you are?" He simply said, "I am awake." That was Buddha's way of pointing beyond all definitions, beyond all descriptions. This state of consciousness is the hardest place to describe because it is literally indescribable. The highest reality is being both this and that, and neither. Being both spirit and human, being a field of open, spacious awareness, as well as one particular human incarnation. This is something that takes great subtlety, a deep willingness to go beyond all of our notions, even our notions of good and bad, right and wrong. One of the Taoist masters said, "When the great way is lost, good and evil are created." The great way refers to the ultimate truth, the ultimate reality. When you and I become unconscious of the great way beyond all duality, then we have to create conventions like good and bad. In the relative world, that's a reasonable thing to do. It's reasonably better to be good than bad. That just makes sense. But in the ultimate state of reality, it's neither good nor bad. It's something that's beyond. So, quite simply, we can say that this is the state beyond the pairs of opposites. What can be the state that's beyond personhood and spirithood, if we can call it this way, beyond the person and the presence? Whatever is there in manifestation implies that it's already divine. It need not be excluded. It need not be avoided. It need not be discerned at. It is a state beyond open and close. It is a state complete in itself, complete in the way it is created, complete in the way it's projected. So ultimately, if we have an opinion that the egoist state of consciousness is a more contracted state or a more judgmental state about a judgmental idea about this state, then how would we view the beings around us? To be able to see them as divine, we need to be able to see our own imperfections as divine. Awareness never said, this imperfection is not me. Awareness never said, I am awareness. Everything that is projected out of this presence is divine. Nothing can harm the presence of this because of this projection, and nothing can harm the witnessing of this. Even if it were to seem that something is being harmed, even then it's okay. Isn't it actually quite nice to enjoy a little bit of turbulence from time to time, knowing that it's all okay? Even when we feel it's not okay. So every time we can ask ourselves, what's the problem now? So for a lot of us in spiritual circles, the problem is often that I've become a person. So then we can ask ourselves, what's the problem now? It may say that if I become a person, I'm not there yet. So then we say, what's the problem now? Then the next thing that may say is, I'm a spiritual failure. Then we say, what's the problem now? Then it may say that if I'm a spiritual failure, I'm unworthy even in this. Then we say, what's the problem now? Then you may say, I don't like to be like this. Then we say, what's the problem now? What has been lost? What's the problem in feeling lost? So I'll continue reading a bit more from Falling into Grace before we can call it a session. This section of the chapter is called The Virgin Birth, Beyond the Pairs of Opposites. You can find common themes throughout many of the world's religions: Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, as well as those that existed long before modern religious history. One of the more common motifs that appears cross-culturally is that of the virgin birth. We all know the story of Jesus and how he was said to be born of a virgin. In Buddhism, we also have the story of Buddha being born from his mother's side. Both of these stories are simply ways of communicating a deeper truth. We are always taught to focus on the historical aspects of these births, what happened, and whether somebody was or wasn't a virgin. But this misses the point. If we just look at the historical facts of some religion and try to decide whether they're right or wrong, we miss the significance of the teaching. These stories of virgin birth refer to the birth of that which is born without the coming together of the opposites. Our human birth is the birth of opposites, is the coming together of male and female, and that produces a human being. Our humanness is a manifestation of the opposites, our hearts opening, our hearts beating, opening, closing, our lungs breathing in and then out, and then in and out. So our physical birth is always a birth of opposites, which is quite beautiful in and of itself. The whole world around us is the manifestation of opposites, no matter what its expression. But this notion of the virgin birth addresses our second birth, our birth after we were born, is the birth in our consciousness of a vision that's not based in duality. These stories recognize that what we really are, is in fact the source of all opposites, of both male and female, both this and that, is the birth of a unified vision right into this world of time and space. Jesus' virgin birth is trying to tell us that this person, Jesus the Christ, was really a manifestation of what was beyond the pairs of opposites. And that person is also you. Certainly, he had a human body and a human mind, just like you. In fact, he referred to himself as the Son of Man. Later, others began to refer to him as the Son of God. Jesus knew that he had a human body and mind, and yet his consciousness was not of the world of opposites. The virgin birth points us to our awakening from the ego. At the moment of awakening, it literally feels like we are being born again, or like something completely new and unexpected has shown up in our consciousness. It literally is a virgin birth, a birth not of duality, but a birth of non-duality, a birth of that which is far beyond all dualities. We don't have to go a long way to find this virgin birth. We can investigate our experience right here and now. Like everything else in truth, it's already present. If you look into this moment and become quiet and sensitive, you intuitively feel that there's something about you, right here and right now, that's not definable as male or female, as this or that. There's something about you that's not definable at all. There's already a sense in you that which cannot be defined by any words. That's the consciousness that's birthing itself into recognition, possibly at this very moment. It may just start out, it may start out just as a glimpse, a taste, a feel. But if you give great attention to it, a recognition dawns that there it is in your experience right now. The fact that our true nature is ultimately non-dual is precisely why when we are born into this material world, we find ourselves attracted to our opposite. It doesn't mean that all men are attracted to women or all women are attracted to men. But if you really look at the deep, intimate, or romantic relationships of human beings, you'll see that there's often something in you that is attracted to your opposite. Something that you feel, something that you don't feel like you have. That's our spirit's deep desire for union, for coming together, for remembering our unified nature. Always there is that which is neither male nor female, but both and beyond. All you have to do is turn, right in the moment, into the depth of your own experience to see this. Let go of your mind trying to define anything, and you'll see for yourselves that what you really are is something beyond all definition. There's a wonderful quote from a very famous Zen master called Huang Po. What it describes is the unity of spirit, that our truest nature is neither this nor that, but both. It also elegantly describes the natural nobility found in all of reality. To begin to experience the truth of what Hong Po was saying here, you must understand how he is using the word mind. He uses it in the way we use the words consciousness or spirit. By mind, he is not referring to the thinking process, but to the context in which all form, including thought itself, appears. He said, the mind is the Buddha, and the Buddha is all living beings. It is not less for being manifest in ordinary beings, nor is it greater for being manifest in the Buddha. This is Huang Po's way of saying that all is one, and whether it's ordinary or extraordinary, it's all an equal expression of spirit. It all has ultimate value, ultimate goodness, and ultimate nobility. It doesn't matter if it's known or unknown. It doesn't matter if it's exalted or small, high or low. When we see with our eyes wide open, we see that everything intrinsically is an expression of divine reality and is filled with ultimate worth and value. So, one last thing I want to say before I end the broadcast was this feeling that I had recently that nothing can go wrong at all. Even when I'm caught up in the mind, nothing can go wrong. Whatever happens, I can't be lost. Whatever happens, I still just am myself. Then a feeling arose. I wonder how I'd look at the world if my past experience were to come. If some of the past experiences of struggle and strife were to come. I wonder how I'd experience it with this knowing, with this knowledge, with this understanding. And it occurred to me that maybe this is how spirit came into form. Thank you for this opportunity for broadcast. Mujiji ki jai. Anantaji ki jai. Sangha ki jai. Om Namah Shivaya.